our structure is that we have to have a minister. Now what we call them for us is a little bit different in the sense of our Roman counterparts. Incidentally, Lutherans, Episcopalians, and Anglicans also have fraternities of Franciscans. The Friars were just, I got called to St. Anne's over in Claremont. I said, sure, sister, I'd be happy to come over and give a vocation talk. So I go over there. After the talk was over, there was about 80 people, and a mixture of Catholics, Anglicans, Lutherans, Episcopalians, all wanting to join the Franciscan order. And my provincial just, like, if he would have had a little hat like me, it would have gotten a propeller and he would have been flying. He's like, how dare you give a talk to the Lutherans on being a Franciscan? And I'm like, why not? What's the problem? And I should have known then that maybe my Roman brothers and sisters at that time were probably not where I should be. But I was young and very well taken care of. I'll be honest, the Friars were very good to me financially. And I was, there's a lot of fear there in leaving that. We're an evangelical fraternity, and the way we're structured, the way the conventuals are structured, and I'll speak to them and give you kind of a comparison, is the successor of Francis in the conventual is known as the Minister General, who's in Assisi. His job and his definitory or his council's job is to go to all the conventual friaries and do visitations and make policies and this type of thing. Then at the more local level, at the province level, you have a provincial who's kind of like a bishop for the order, that doesn't have the powers of a bishop because they're not consecrated. They're elected for 3 years. If the friars so choose, they can elect them for another 3 years, and then they have to step down. Their job is to make sure the province has all the spiritual, financial, physical needs being met. And then each individual house has a guardian, which is considered a local superior. Their job is to make sure all the friars in that house have all the spiritual, physical, so you can see how this kind of trickled down. The way we do it, because if we had a minister general, a minister provincial, and a guardian, we wouldn't have any friars left because there are 3 of us. The way it's written is if we ever do get big, like 80 to 100 friars or more, we can have a minister general. We can elect one, because we'll have enough for that person to have a definitory or a council. But we can, our province is the United States. So what we've done is that we have a guardian, and that is the person that is like our chief leader, and that's Father Chris. And then you have a vicar, which is me, so if something happens to Father Chris, I need to boss Father James Calderon around. Those are the 3 of us in our fraternity. And we try to do what our Roman brothers and sisters do. We try to have chapters. We try to have fraternity. But because one's in New Mexico, me, one's in Maryland, Father Chris, in Pennsylvania, Father Jim, it's hard for us to get together on a regular basis. And that's where this whole idea of the Recollect comes in, because it's more of a solitude. There's a big component to that, and that's much more compatible for what we are, what we can do. I think that these are just some personal reflections that I jotted down. When I was with the conventuals, there was always this big conflict on being a priest and being a friar. And in the province I was, it was this emphasis that the Franciscan vocation was first. The ordained ministry was always secondary. Well, that's what they said. But when it came down to it, it was not exactly expressed that way. The conventuals that province I was with, was a much more clerical-minded group of guys. They use language like, well, you're just a brother. That was common. I know that when I studied in ACCUS, which was St. Anthony's province, which is New York province, they effectively got rid of all the brothers in formation because they didn't see that they had nuns cleaning and cooking for them. The sisters that came from Steubenville that were just, God, they could cook. They could cook. They could snap a habit and wash it and iron it in about 30 minutes. It was, wow. They were a lovely, lovely group of ladies. But they did all for the friars. They did all that for us. So the brothers, what were they to do? Especially in the California province, because higher learning was like a waste of ideas, money, and time. So that is kind of a disjointed thing. We don't do that. We don't put this emphasis on ordination with us. Now, how that's going to look within the ACCUS is yet to be seen. Because we haven't been in that position of someone wanting to come to us to be a non-ordained member of the fraternity. But we don't see it as a problem. You know, in our discussion with Bishop Harms and Bishop Bill, we don't see it as it's going to be problematic. As long as they're not like renegades and do all these other things, you know, that they conform to the idealism of the fraternity. Ministry was always a big thing with the conventuals in California. You had to have a ministry. You had to be doing something. You had to be engaged. And when Father Chris and I talked about this, it's like, well, if the Recollects were more of a contemplative type of expression of the Franciscan spirit, why do we have to do? Why can't some of them, if they choose, be? And we believe, as in a lot of more contemplative expressions of spirituality, like the Benedictine tradition, hermits of the church. You know, prayer is a very viable ministry. I love it when people pray for me because I need all the help I can get. So we don't really put this whole emphasis on a ministry per se, that you got to be doing something. You don't have to be absolutely engaged in an activity of sorts. We bring back to Bill Short. He wrote a really wonderful article, Recovering Lost Traditions and Spirituality, Franciscan Camaldolese and the Hermitage. And this sparked a great interest for me because my partner Anthony is a Camaldolese. Now that can be a little bit of a misnomer on one level. Bill was talking with the Order of Camaldolese in Big Sur. And they're not the hermits that my partner was with. And if you want this article, I can even copy it and send it to you. It's pretty interesting. And what it basically comes out of is when Pope John Paul II had challenged the religious orders to take a moment, step back from what you're doing, re-examine the early documents of your founders and foundresses, and try to kind of move back toward those early days of your founding and foundresses, of what their original vision was, what their original intention was. And because Francis did go away, he did withdraw. He took very seriously the gospel of when Jesus would step back and go off by himself. Francis did the same thing. So that's where this whole contemplative idea comes from. He points out that, you know, Francis often retreated from crowds, from the apostolate to places of solitude. And I think that there's been some lost stuff through the years from the friars. I think the conventuals, not all provinces, because they all have expressions that are different. And I think that's one of the things that makes it hard to understand it. But for me, it's a beautiful thing because it's very varied. And it demonstrates there's just no one way to express the Franciscan spirituality or idealism. There's many ways to do it because Francis was many things to many people. And so I think that gets beautiful. But I think that it did get lost somewhere with all the reforms, that we lost, at least the conventual group I was with, lost that whole idea. Because contemplation was not talked about a lot. Recollecting, retreating to, going on retreat was not, province retreats, but then again, that whole idea of community, which is very strong with the conventuals in California. But individual retreats, yeah, you can go, but it wasn't emphasized. Spiritual direction, you should have one, it's a good idea, but it really wasn't beyond that encouraged. Now the friary I was in, Jamie knows Father Greg Gilroy, you had no choice. You had a spiritual director that you saw regularly. It was not an option. With Greg Gilroy, that was not an option. Period. And so I was very lucky that way because I was very young when I was with the friars. I was in my 20s and had a lot of very lofty ideals about that. And one of my favorite things of Francis, while you're proclaiming peace with your lips, be careful to have it more fully in your heart. There's a number of them that I really like too. Is if you're remember to preach the gospel and if necessary use words as attributed to him is another one of my favorite.